Okay, Chapter 2, Who Stole the Lattice? From Mango's Mischief and Tales of Friendship, Stories from India, by Chitra Soundar, illustrated by Uma Krishnaswamy. Who Stole the Lattice? Ever since Methuram had brought the sweets into the court, not a meal was eaten without discussing them. The cooks, sentries, maids, everyone talked about the sweets and the fragrance that lingered in the hallways. Maybe the prince should have given the sweets to everyone, said the sentry. Maybe the prince should have fined Methuram and made him bring more sweets, said another. Prince Vera, too, found it difficult to forget the aroma of the sweets. He ordered that the palace be sprayed with camphor fumes to wipe out the wafting smell, but it didn't help. The smell was lodged in everyone's minds. Wiping it out of the courtyard, thrones, curtains, and carpets didn't make it go away. The news reached the ministers, then the queen, then the king. "What is this gossip about sweets?" King Bhima asked. "It's nothing, father, just a case," said Prince Vera. "Was the smell really divine?" asked the queen. "Yes, it was. Not even the royal cook has made sweets that smell like that." "Your father loves sweets," said the queen, "especially those made of butter. The lattice, that's his favorite." "Maybe we should order some sweets," said the king. "If only I'd handled this case before I let you have your own court." "Let me check that Methuram is not cheating anyone now. If he has reformed his ways, then you can buy sweets from his shop," Prince Vera said. He didn't want Methuram to use his court to sell more sweets. So the next day, the prince set off to the market, dressed like an urchin. "Can you find the shop on your own?" asked the queen. "I'll ask around," said the prince. But he didn't have to. The buttery, sugary smell wafted through the market, telling him where to go. Vera sat outside the sweet shop for hours, smelling the cinnamon, cardamom, and cashews. He watched the customers come in, and he saw that Methuram was fair to them. He looked at the plates on the shelves loaded with sweets, and he licked his lips, but he bought nothing. After sunset, Methuram closed his shop, and Prince Vera returned to the palace, hungry, tired, and hot. It is hard business, this justice, he thought. But it was good to know that Methuram had indeed mended his ways. The next day, the prince sent a sentry with a large cart down to the market. The king had written down his order for the sweets, and so had the queen. Prince Vera and Suku wanted some too. Every member of the royal household wanted some sweets. Methuram was delighted. He checked the list many times. He loaded the cart with sweet. "These are for the king and queen," and the prince, he said. "I will personally deliver the rest by tomorrow. First, we have to make a new batch." "That means the rest of us will have to wait another day," said the sentry, and he drove the cart back toward the palace. Back at the palace, the royal family was waiting. As soon as the cart arrived, the sweets were unloaded and brought into the kitchen. The king stepped forward and opened a large box of lattice. The yellow balls of lentils fried in sugar syrup glistened in the light. "Svadishta! Delicious!" he cried after biting into a big laddu. Just as he finished the first and reached for a second, the minister arrived. "A messenger from the kingdom of Chalu is here to see you, your majesty," he said. "Not now," the king moaned. "Sorry, your majesty, this is of the utmost importance." The king put the box down on the table. There were exactly 11 lattice left. "Don't smell them, and don't touch them," he warned, "and don't eat them." Early the next morning, Prince Vera was awakened by a loud noise. He stumbled out of bed and went to the door. What was it? It was not thunder, but more like a roar. He opened the door and listened intently. It sounded like his father, but King Bhima never shouted, at least not that early in the morning. The sun had not even risen high enough to warm the pond in the garden. Prince Vera slipped out of his room and followed the sound. His father was not in his room. He was not in the courtyard. His father was not on the grounds or anywhere near the pond. Where could he be? Prince Vera listened hard. The sound came from the far east wing of the palace by the royal kitchen. What was his father doing in the kitchen? He hardly ever went there, unless he didn't want anyone to know he was eating. Then Vera remembered the sweets that his father had to abandon until his official duties were over. Vera walked swiftly to the kitchen. A crowd of servants stood outside, their ears to the door. Inside, the king ranted and raved. When Prince Vera walked closer, the servants moved away. "What's going on?" Vera asked. "It's about the laddu," said one of the maids. "The laddu? It's the reason for this anger? I handled the case, and I brought that fragrance into the palace," Vera thought. "Oh, my sweet butters, what's going to happen to me?" "One laddu is missing," said the maid. "The king left exactly 11 of them in the box last night. This morning, when he came by, only 10 remained. Do you know who took the missing laddu?" "No one knows. Nobody will own up." Prince Vera smiled. This was something he could handle. Well, the laddu had gone missing. It would never come back, but the memory of its fragrance and its taste would never leave the mind of the person who had eaten it. "Time for me to sort this out," he said, as he pushed the door open and went into the kitchen. Inside, he saw that the king was still in his pajamas, standing on top of a huge cauldron. His face was red. The kitchen staff stood in front of him, shaking like flags on a windy day. "Father, what's the problem?" Vera asked. The king stopped his tirade and looked at his son. "I want to know who is lying. I can forgive stealing, but not lying." "Why not leave this to me?" said the prince. "I'll find out." "This is all because of your case," said the king. "We were happy before we knew about Metram's sweets." Prince Vera hung his head. The sooner he found the culprit, the better it would be for everyone. He braced himself and looked up. "Father, you have many appointments today. Why don't you get ready while I solve this problem? I'll bring the culprit to your court." King Bhima handed the box of lattice to his guard and said, "Keep this under lock and key." Prince Vera smiled. "Remember," he said to everyone, "you are in the kitchen to cook food, not to steal it. The sooner we get to the bottom of this, the sooner we can all get back to cooking breakfast and lunch." No one stirred. The thief was lying low. "I know the sweets are very tempting and the smell makes you hungry, but it is not good to lie to the king," said Prince Vera. "Now, who took the laddu?" No one would own up. Not a single word was spoken. Prince Vera didn't know who the thief could be. "I'll tell the king to forgive you," said the prince. "But you must confess now." Again, no one stepped forward. "Then it is time to invoke the god of honesty," the prince said, signaling to the sentry. "Please fetch me 20 pieces of firewood of the same length." In a few minutes, the sentry returned with an armload of firewood. "Each of you gets 1 piece of wood," said the prince. "You will step through the pantry, invoking the god of honesty, and pray for mercy. Then you will come out the other side." Everyone nodded. "If you are speaking the truth, your firewood will shrink by an inch by the time you step on the other side. If you are lying, the god of honesty will not grace you with his presence, and your stick will remain the same length." The sentry handed out the sticks as each person walked through the pantry. The prince stood waiting on the other side. As they walked in, each of them chanted the familiar slogan, "Satamiva Jati," invoking the god of honesty. Then they stepped out of the pantry and stood in front of the prince with their piece of wood. "Measure each of these," Vera ordered. The sentry measured each piece of firewood and noted the measurements on a scroll. Prince Vera then read through the scroll and smiled. "I know who did it. Tell the king we will be in the court shortly." But the king didn't wait for Vera. He wanted to know who had lied to him. He came to the kitchen right away. "Do you know who did it?" asked the king. "Yes, father, I know who stole the laddu and who lied to us," said the prince. "I'll forgive the stealing. The laddu is not important. We're getting another cartload today, but who lied to me?" The fourth man from the right, said Prince Vera. Before the king could say anything, the liar fell at the king's feet. I am sorry, your majesty. I won't lie to you ever again. Take him away. We'll deal with him later, said the king. How did you find this out, Vera? I merely invoked the conscience of the guilty man, Prince Vera said. Did you threaten him? Asked the king. Father, I did no such thing, said Vera, and he explained what he had made the servants do. How did that help? Did the guilty man confess? No, Father, the servants believed that the God of honesty would shrink their firewood if they were innocent. Because the God of honesty would not help him, the guilty man was afraid that his firewood would be longer than the others. The king nodded with his eyes closed. He understood the mind of wrongdoers. They always lived in fear of being found out. The culprit took a knife and chopped a small bit of firewood. So when we measured all the pieces at the end, the one with the shortest firewood was the liar. Prince Vera held up the scroll. Well done, my son. The Ladu thief was caught by his own guilty conscience. So can I share a Ladu with you, Father? Vera asked. Of course you can, my son. The king said, Can I share one of your jalabis?